inside of a prison, doing psychology services, providing mental health services for the inmates. It's a federal prison, so we hold about 1,200 federal inmates. It's a male prison, and I've been now with the Bureau for 7 years. 6 of those years practicing as a psychologist, 1 year as an intern. For your doctoral training, you have to do 1 year of internship, a full year of basically what you'd have is like a residency in, like, for example, medicine. So I did my internship there, and I ended up loving the job, and so I decided to stay on with the Bureau. Officially, if you work inside of a prison for the federal system, you have to become a correctional officer, a federal officer first. You can't work inside of the prison without becoming a correctional officer. So, I went to school to be a therapist, and I ended up kind of like becoming this federal officer, which I didn't mean to, but they just said that's kind of what you have to do. And I ended up liking prison, which sounds really strange. Not that I like prison, but it ended up being a good fit for me, for my personality, for what I wanted to do, for my goals in my career. But I didn't start out that way. I definitely didn't say, I'm going to go to jail one day. I started out actually here. I grew up in Santa Ana. My parents were immigrants from Mexico, from a very small village in southeast Mexico. Half of my family immigrated. The other half did not. My mom's family all immigrated here to the United States. I was born in the migration process. I was born in Tijuana, Mexico, right here in the border town. My dad came here first, as many immigrant families you may know. Usually one person immigrates first, kind of gets a feel for it, or some stability, a job, maybe some place to live, and then little by little family members are brought. It's kind of the immigrant kind of trajectory, very similar to mine experience. My dad worked here in the fields, and my parents have really very little formal education. Both my mother and my father grew up in a small village, a very rural village, and so the most they got was maybe second or third year education in that rural village. So my parents, if you're looking at it from a scholarly academic point, were what they would probably label as functionally literate, meaning they could barely read and write, and they could do basic math, and that's about it. But because of the poverty and some of the situations at home, they left and tried to find a new place. So we ended up immigrating here. And we ended up immigrating here into Orange County because my father worked in the fields up in Fresno and Bakersfield. And then through contacts and meeting people, he met a man who offered him a job working at a restaurant here in Seal Beach, right by the coast. I always used to joke with my father, how did you end up in like one of the most expensive areas of the United States? And he's like, I didn't know. He chased the work. Wherever the work was, that's where he would go. That's why he ended up in the fields in Fresno, and that's why he ended up here in Seal Beach. So he got a job as a busboy. This was 1970, 1971. And he ended up working. And at that time, unfortunately, unlike today, if you came in, if you could work, if you did the job, they just paid you, and that's what you did. No papers, no nothing. I mean, the laws were there. No one really cared about him at the time. There wasn't an immigrant problem, if you can call it that, what they say nowadays. There's very few people who were immigrating that way. The Bracero program of the 50s had gone out of style and become legal. And so now people were just coming and working, and then they'd leave. So he got a job very easily. He then immigrated his brother-in-law. He then immigrated another brother-in-law. My uncles, who were in their 13 and 14 years old range at the time, they all started working all over these restaurants. And of course, being who he was, he said, hey, do you know any more jobs I can get? Because I only have one job. That was my father's mentality. I only worked 8 hours a day. What am I supposed to do the rest of the day? So he got a second job at another restaurant, did the same thing. And then I was, I guess my mom was in Tijuana at the time with some of my aunts. They all stayed there as the men immigrated here and started working. Little by little, money got saved up. I was born there in TJ in a place that now is, I think, a pizza parlor. It was a small little shop where a doctor used to operate his office. I guess that's where I was born. I only knew that because one day my mom said, "Hey, that's where you were born." And I was like, "Where?" I'm looking for like a hospital or a clinic or something. And I'm just like, "No, I And I'm like, "That's a pizza shop." Well, there was a doctor that used to work out of there. And I'm like, "I'm in a pizza shop." But anyway, once I was born, I was brought over here at the age of like 4 months. And we lived in a motel room here for the first 2 years up in Seal Beach. The motel still exists. It's interesting when I drive by there. I actually drive by there on my way to work now every day. It's fascinating. So as most immigrant families do, we 6 people in one motel room, then 10 people in 2 motel rooms, and then everyone saves up and buys one, rents one apartment. The one apartment turns into 2 apartments. The 2 apartments turn into 4 apartments, and then all of those people go maybe into one home to rent a home, and then eventually to buy a home. So fast forward that 30 years later, my parents owned 2 homes. They had stable jobs. They worked all the time. I grew up in Orange County, and my family was Mexican on the inside of the house, and we were American on the outside of the house. I don't know if you can relate to that experience. You come home, and the language, the culture, the food, the atmosphere is your home country. When I came home, it was Mickey. The traditions, everything we did, the food, the way we cooked, everything was that way. I left the home, and it was only not until I got into kindergarten that I realized that I had to speak English. I never had to before. I mean, I could because I heard it on TV and radio and things. But now I was being taught in English, and it was very kind of like, oh, like this is strange. But that's my first encounter with the language. But as most bilingual students will know, you just kind of learn to adapt, and you kind of bring in both, and simultaneously you learn. Little by little, we moved up from those apartments, and my parents really struggled and did a whole lot of sacrificing. I still to this day don't know how they did it, but they did. They save up a lot of money. They do a lot of work, and they're really disciplined about it, and they're able to afford a better home. And we move into these neighborhoods where, at the time, I'm really one of the only people of color in the schools where I go to. There's not too many Latinos. There's mostly, it was at that time, Latinos and Vietnamese students because of the Vietnamese immigration that happened because of the war in the 70s. So around that same time, these 2 kind of communities kind of conglomerate here in Orange County. And so it was a really interesting upbringing. At the time, my goal in high school was to get out of high school, get to work, and go become a truck driver. That was my dream. My father had been a truck driver, and my grandfather had sold vegetables in Mexico, and so I kind of had this thing about being a truck driver. We'd always traveled through Mexico, and so I loved it. So I thought, well, all I need is my GED and to get my Class A license, and I'm going to go become a truck driver. That's the whole goal I had. So when it came to school, in high school, junior high and high school, I could care less. If I can pass the test, then I'm fine. Do I get a B or a C? Whatever, I pass. Okay, good. Ditching class, having fun, kind of doing all that stuff that everyone tells you not to do if you want to go to college. So, come the senior year of high school, because of the bad influences, because of the atmosphere that I was around, things start crumbling down. A friend of mine died of suicide. A couple of friends of mine had DUI accidents. Things start going really bad, and I'm sitting here kind of this terrified 17-year-old kid thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do? Like, I got to get out of here. I become kind of acquainted with my photography teacher. I was into photography, so I inadvertently ended up taking her class, and she ended up having a relationship with me in a good way. Not in a bad way. She was a brilliant, brilliant teacher. She taught photography, but she also taught a counseling class that we decided all to take because we liked her. Everyone loved her. She was really good. And then one day she kind of pulled me aside after class, and she's like, "Are you okay?" It's like, something's going on. And because all my friends that were having all the issues were outside of school, I had older friends, which you shouldn't have when you're 16, but I kind of was like, well, something happened and all this stuff, and I'm worried and like I'm freaking out and all this stuff. And from then on, like every few days after school, I would sit in her lab and help her clean, and just because I like photography, and we would just talk. She would just talk to me about my family and how things were going, and she would share her stories about how she grew up and the things that happened in her life too. And then one day, finally, my senior year, she really just kind of sat me down, and I remember very distinctly the question that she asked me, which was, what do you really want to do with your life? What genuinely do you, like, if there was no problem with money, if there was no problem with family, if you could do anything in the world, what would you want to do? The reason I remembered it so much is because nobody had ever asked me that question. I had always been asked, you need to do this, or you can only do that. My guidance counselor actually said, I'm not college material, so you better make sure you get a good job after high school because you really aren't going to go anywhere outside of high school. And at the time, I kind of like was adopting that reality, like, yeah, you're right. So why? Because, I was going to be, the first person in my family to ever go to anything but a high school. If in my family, if we graduated high school, that was a big deal. A lot of us didn't. Of my cousins, for example, of which there was 24 first cousins over here on my side. And so I kind of was like, yeah, I guess he's right. When I told this teacher what my guidance counselor had told me, she freaked out. She's like, what? I hate that man. I mean, I was like, why are you so angry? Because he's not supposed to say that. Like, you're one of the brightest students I have. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I have straight C's. I don't care about school. And when she asked me that question, what do you really want to do? I was literally like, it was the first time someone had really put on my shoulders the choice of where my life was going to go. And I said, I don't know, but I do like the way I talk to you and the way you've kind of helped me understand certain things. And she said, you know you can do that, right? And I'm like, what? She said, talk to people and help them with their problems. And of course, I said, like a priest? That's all I associated with someone who you talked to and helped you with your problem. She said, no, not a priest. Unless you want to become a priest, that's fine. And I said, no, I don't want to become a priest, that's for sure. So she said, you can become a counselor. I'm like, what's a counselor? And so she described it to me, and I was like, you got to go to college for that. You got to go to school. And at the time, because you're 18 and you think you know everything anyways. So I said, I've already screwed that up. Like, it's too late. She's like, no, it's not. You're just starting. And I said, but I can't apply to schools. This was a month before my graduation from high school. And so I was like, nah, it's not going to work. She's like, you can go to community college. And she said, I did it. That's exactly how I did it. At the time she grew up, she was older. At the time she grew up, women didn't really go to college that much. So for her, she had to go to community college back east and then go to a state school and then do that. But she did get her degree. Later on, I came to find out her degree was in counseling. She became a photographer later in life, which is fascinating to me. So for some reason, that conversation stuck with me and stuck with me and stuck with me. And then a week later, about 2 or 3 weeks before graduation, I told my parents, I'm going to college. And they're like, ¿para qué? Like, not don't, but just like, wait, I thought you were going to drive. I thought you were going to work. Like, I'd already been studying for my truck driver's license and all that stuff. My whole goal was to make money and get the heck out of California. And I said, but here's the thing. I'm moving away. And of course, after we picked up my mom from the floor because she fainted, and no, my baby's leaving. What's going on? And I'm like, no. I'm gonna go to community college, and but I have to get out of here. This place is crawling with cousins and friends and what we like to call the Me Too fools of the world. Me Too fools are the term we use in prison for the guys that help you go and get into bad trouble. You know, hey, you guys want to go rob a store? Yeah, me too. Those are the Me Too fools. And they're always around you. So I said, if I stay here with everything that's going on, I'm never going to make it. It's too distracting. I need to get out. I had worked a lot with my father. My father, at the time, had a side business of cleaning carpets and doing floors, waxing floors and cleaning carpets in the evenings on weekends. And so I worked a lot with him. I was scrubbing floors and doing that stuff to make extra money. We always worked. All our family always worked. My sister, I only have one sister. My sister and I, and both my parents, the four of us, would work since I was about 8 or 9 years old, doing side jobs, cleaning office buildings, and that's what we all did. But by the time I was 14 or 15, I saw that little hustle potential, and I was like, okay, I can wax this floor for $300 on the weekend, at midnight. I'm like, okay, I can do that. So by the time I was 18 years old, I saved a good amount of cash in a legal way. So I told my mom, I'm taking my money, and I'm getting out of here. I went as far as I could get without having to pay out-of-state tuition, so I packed up my car and I moved to San Francisco a month after graduation. And I enrolled in City College of San Francisco. And I literally went into the college and I said, I want to be a counselor. What do I need to do? They're like, okay, take the placement test. Did you graduate from it? Yeah, I'm like, here's my high school diploma, solid C student. So what do I need to do? And they're like, a lot. So they gave me the placement test and I failed the English portion. It was a math and English. The math part I did really good. I was always good at math. I don't know why. It just stuck. English, I didn't do too good. Why? Because I was never disciplined. I never read. I never studied. If I could copy someone else's test and get a straight C, then I was fine. So then I came back and the counselor said, are you sure you want to be a counselor? And I said, yeah, why? She said, you're not too good with the language. And that's all it takes. You have to read a lot and write a lot. If you don't want to go into business or engineering or something like that, I'm like, no, I want to do that whole counseling psych thing, whatever it is you call it. That's what I want to do. And she said, okay, you have to go into remedial English classes. You have to start from the bottom. And it was very humbling. Because then they put me in classes with students from, this was in San Francisco, from all over, Asian students, a lot of Pacific Islander students, because they were coming in from the Atlantic, obviously. And I was in there with students, and students would say, like, how long have you been in this country? I'm like, 18 years. And they're like, why are you here? I'm like, because I don't know English too well. And they're like, didn't you go to school? Like, yeah. What happened? I'm like, I just never learned. It was humbling. It was embarrassing to sit there and have a person who literally came to the country a year before who had better English skills than me. And I'd grown up around here. So I took that experience and just kind of decided, you know what? I need to really do some work here. There's a lot I don't know. Pretty much everything. I started working as a security guard overnights. I checked out books, and I just read everything that I could get my hands on. And I was interested in counseling, so I just read everything. I took an intro to psych class, my very first psych class, and I started learning about psychology. And it fascinated me. Human behavior fascinated me. Why people did what they did, it fascinated me. So when I read one thing, that led me to read something else, and then that led me to read more and more and more and more. And I was like this starving child. I couldn't stop. I just kept reading and reading. Luckily, I had removed myself from the distractions, and I didn't know anybody in San Francisco. I was completely by myself. I rented a little room in the back house somewhere, and I just worked and went to school, It was the first time in my life that I really applied myself. I really made myself learn how to learn. And I loved it. I found out that I had this passion for it. And so then from then on, I decided that's what I'm going to do. I graduated with my bachelor's in science from San Francisco State. I went to City College for 2 years, transferred to San Francisco State, graduated from San Francisco State. And then because of family reasons, I had to move back to Orange County. And so that's when I was like, well, I got to find a master's program because, in psychology, you can't do anything with a bachelor's, unfortunately. I found this out halfway through my bachelor's. They said, no, you have to get your master's. I'm like, I have to get another one? They're like, yes. I'm like, how long does that take? Well, full-time, maybe 2 years. I'm like, 2 more years? Okay, so I went and I did that. I applied here, and I got into the Master's in Counseling program. That's where I met Dr. Jose Cervantes. He teaches right here at the Master's in Counseling program. He still teaches it. He was the first Latino psychologist that I had ever met. The very first person who actually maybe even looked like me and sounded like me, but was actually a practicing psychologist. I'd never met one before. So I was like, wow, how did you get to do what you did? And so he sat me down and talked to me, became my mentor ever since then. This was 99. And I still, collaborate with him on many things now. And so I got into the counseling program. I approached my work the same way my father approached work in general. That's just what I knew in life. So when I went to my practicums and they said, okay, you need to get a site and work, and I said, okay, well, that's what we have to do and go to school. And then I was also working full-time on the side as a clerk at a hotel to pay the bills. And so I got my job, and I was like, okay, so when do I have to show up and how? And they're like, well, it's only like a practicum, so you're only a student, so like 15 or 20 hours. I'm like, so what am I supposed to do after that? They're like, well, you have classes. And I'm like, well, I can't just work 6 hours, 4 hours. What am I going to do? So I got 2 practicums instead. And I got another one. Because I thought, you know what, if I work 16 hours a day, it's not working 16 hours a day in the fields picking fruit, or it's not, scrubbing dishes, or, hauling that big, shampoo machine that I had to do. I can just sit here and counsel people and learn, and I can do this all day long. So I approached my work that way, and I worked a lot. I worked a lot of hours. I saw all the clients I could. I started a community mental health clinic, and I started working with children. And it was really the first time that I was like, wow, I was exposed to the aspect of children's mental health and child therapy. And it blew me away. It opened my mind in so many ways. So I went on to specialize my first 5 years in child trauma and sexual abuse with little ones, mainly from ages about 5 to about 15. And then I started working in anger management groups and doing anger management groups, domestic violence treatment for perpetrators of domestic violence, men who had been convicted of abusing their spouses. And then once they get convicted of that, they have to take a mandatory year-long domestic violence course. So I started facilitating those groups. The more I did the work, the more I loved the work. The more I was just fascinated, which led me to read more and study more, and then to work more and then study more. And it was just back and forth. The whole time, my family have no idea what I'm really doing. They're just like, well, he's doing this counseling psychology. I don't know what he does. I guess he just goes to work and talks to people. And my people in my family were like, yeah, it must be nice. You just sit there and listen to people and they pay you. Like, geez, where can I get that job? And I'm like, it's actually not that simple, but it's hard to explain to somebody. I started working a lot, but then I realized something about the counseling profession. That while it's not laborious, I'm not pushing a machine, or I'm not, doing a dry press, or I'm not, out there doing construction or anything. Mentally, I started to get drained and drained. Because, and I tell all my students this, I teach at Pepperdine, and I tell all my students this, you as a counselor become the person who gets to witness people's worst problems, people's biggest fears. You're the one who they present that to. And as any of you may know, if you've been with someone who's going through a very, very difficult emotional time, it drains you too, to support them, to help them, to try and understand them. It's very difficult. It just becomes draining. And I was doing this, 8, 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week if I could. But I didn't know that literally, little by little, I was draining myself. Like, I was tired. And the field of child trauma is even more so draining because of the fact that it has to do with children. because for every 10 cases you get, 5 of them unfortunately don't work out, and 5 do. But you can never get your mind off those 5 that didn't work out, and you're heartbroken. And so you sometimes start to take that personally. I could have done more. And here I was in this mindset that if I study more, if I learn more about child theory, if I learn more about child development, I won't lose any kids. Like, none of them will go bad. All the cases will go good. And nobody's that good. It's impossible, because you're not the one who's in charge of the case. The family is the ones in charge of the case. So little by little, I started realizing this work is really hard. It's actually a lot harder than I ever expected. At the same time, it made me start to see my life and things in my life different. Like, this is not the world I thought it was. All of this was something that I never anticipated. I just thought, I'm going to go be a counselor. If I have to get my master's, I'll do that. And then I'll go and I'll work and I'll have a job. I was thinking about it the way I had seen all the men in my family approach work. You go, you work, and then once you're done with work, you come home for whatever time you had. You do what you need to do at home, and then the next day you go back to work, and that's what you do. And I realized as a therapist, as a counselor, I didn't have that luxury anymore. When I was coming home with all this stuff in my head. So I had to learn how to do self-care. And then I had to realize I gotta do something else other than just this, because I'm gonna fall out, I'm gonna drain myself. So I met somebody who was a professor at Pepperdine who convinced me to go back to school and do some research. The more I worked with Latino families, the more I worked with Latino men, domestic violence, adolescents, the more I realized I'm one of the few people here that looks like me and sounds like me. Most of the clinics that I've worked in, including hospitals and even now in the federal system, the field of right now of psychology, counseling and psychology, is dominated by females. They're probably about 75% of the graduates in our graduate programs. Right now I teach at the Master's in Psychology with an emphasis in Latino mental health at Pepperdine, and that program is about 90% females. Every 25 students that I have, every class of 25 students, I probably have 1 or 2 males at the most. So anytime I went to work somewhere, I would walk into work and they'd be like, "Oh, thank God, you have a male counselor." And I was like, where's everyone else? And they're like, "You're it." Also, bilingual clinicians are in high demand. There's very few people who not only have the education and the training, but also the bilingual skills. So many times where I worked, I found myself to be the only male on the clinical staff and the only one of the only Spanish-speaking or bilingual clinicians, which meant that I got all those cases. And so I decided, you know what, the more I had, like, for example, I would see on the average 30 to 35 patients a week. For every 35 patients I had a wait list of 10 to 15 people waiting to see me. Once I tried to kind of work more hours, guess what would happen to the wait list? Get bigger and bigger. So I thought, okay, we're doing really good work. I'm seeing as many patients as I can. And then the wait list, by the way, now it's 15, now it's 17, now it's 21, now it's 23. And so when that professor met with me and I talked with him at a conference that we were at, I decided, you know what, maybe instead of working 60 hours a week, I can work 40 hours a week and teach someone to do this. And then hopefully we'll have 2 of us doing it, and we can both work 40 hours a week. So I decided to go back to Pepperdine and do my doctoral work. I went back in 2006. I graduated in 2011. Within that time, I worked in different areas, as Aaron was mentioning. I worked at Community Mental Health. I worked at the Veterans Administration Hospital. I was a clinical director here in Fullerton for an unaccompanied children's program. Immigrant children who travel from Central and South America and make their way to the United States. The sheltered children that you hear about sometimes a couple of years back in the news. Children who are detained by Immigration and Customs at the border, but they have no parents with them. They have no So they're minors that are unaccompanied. The U.S. cannot just send them back to Honduras or Guatemala. They can't just send them back without any guardian. The U.S. actually has to take custody of them and try to find relatives. They set up a system of shelter, secure, private, confidential homes all over the country, residences where these children can go so they can be protected. So they can't be sent to detention centers, they can't be sent to jail. They have to be sent to special homes where they have, teachers and nurses and psychologists and people who take care of them. And then the job of the shelters is to find a relative. We've had children. I had a little girl who traveled from Guatemala. She was 9 years old. She traveled by herself. She was caught here at the border. All she had was a name and a phone number of an aunt that lived in Chicago. That's all she traveled with. So as you can imagine, a lot of things can happen to very vulnerable children like that who come by themselves. The system of shelters contracted me a few years ago to build a kind of mental health intervention program. They had no mental health training. And the workers were seeing a lot of problems with these kids, and they didn't know how to deal with them. So I was the clinical director there for a little over a year, setting up the mental health program. And it was fascinating work. It was just amazing kind of stuff. I worked in spinal cord injury with veterans at the VA hospital here in Long Beach, in their spinal cord unit, men and women who were coming back from the original Desert Storm and were injured and were now paralyzed, from the waist down or from the neck down. And I'm like, what am I going to do with this? Like, these aren't injuries I can do anything about. And they're like, no. But what we see is a lot of depression and a lot of suicide in these veterans. I'm like, how does a veteran commit suicide when they can't even move their body? They're like, they literally try to choke themselves to death. When we feed them, they try to hoard the food, and they just try to swallow to hope that they can asphyxiate. They were still trying to commit suicide even though they were paralyzed from the neck down. That's the amount of depression that they had. These were young men in their early 20s. I worked there for a year, working with trauma patients up in Los Angeles, San Bernardino. I worked a lot in the school systems with adolescents, doing gang intervention and anger management with children here in the South Bay and the LA area, Gardena, Bell Gardens, those kind of places. Trying to work interventions in the schools, try to help kids out with the gang violence and all that stuff. Eventually, what that led me to do is specialize in one of the things that I have a passion about, which is treatment of Latino men and anger. That's what led me into the prison system. Because when you go into your doctoral work, they make you choose a topic that you're going to do a dissertation on. What are you going to study? And they do advise you, study something that you're passionate about. Because no matter what it is, after 4 years of reading and writing about it, you're going to get sick of it. You're going to hate it because you just have to think about it so much. So don't do something that you just want to do to get out of the way, because it will tear you up. You won't be able to finish it. Do something that at least when you get sick of it and tired of it, at least you have an emotional passion about. That way you'll continue working. So I chose anger management with Latino men. And I studied the effects of how machismo, the concept of Latino masculinity, affects domestic violence relationships. And that was my research. And so, if you want to treat angry Latino men, you go to prison. That's where a lot of them end up. That's why I took and I applied for my internship there, for my doctoral training. And I was lucky enough to get in. I say lucky enough because I still work in that program now. That program accepts we get 140 applicants nationwide for their doctoral training to work there at that prison. We have 4 slots for those 140 applicants. Out of those 140, we weed out about 70% of them, and we interview only about 40 applicants. From those 40 applicants, we rounded down to 10, and from those 10, the 4 are chosen. So it's very competitive and very difficult to get in. I don't know how I was lucky enough to get in. Maybe it's my people skills. But when I talked to one of my supervisors, who's now a colleague of mine, she told me one of the things that we liked about you in your interview was you were not a traditional psychologist. You didn't think the way a lot of people who, since they're 6 years old, want to become psychologists. You didn't think that way. And I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, thought differently about cases. You saw the world in a different way. And one time she asked me, why do you think that is? And I said, because I think about it the way my parents think about it. I see, and when I work with somebody, bless you, I work with them from the way I'm like, how would a regular person like, let's say my mom, how would they see this person? How would she conceptualize this? And really, I start from there, and then little by little, I add on maybe the training, the experience, the theory that I know, and that's how I work with people. And my friend told me, she said, that's what we liked about you in the interview. You had a different side to you. And it was interesting to me because here I am, 25 years later, realizing that the reason maybe something that gave me an edge was my bicultural identity. The fact that I came from a place that wasn't the traditional kind of Western academic place, that is what gave me the edge. It wasn't necessarily the language skills. It was a way of thinking that was different. It wasn't better or worse. It was just different. And in many ways, that is, I think, what gets you to places that a lot of times you don't feel you can get. There's a lot of research nowadays about the bicultural identity and the bicultural kind of mindset. That, for example, people who come or are immigrants into a place, it doesn't necessarily just this country, immigrants into different areas of life, they have what we call more cognitive flexibility, meaning they're able to function in two different areas simultaneously. And if you think about it, if you're an immigrant or if the children of immigrants, that's kind of just how you grew up. You adapted to the world. But what that gives you is a great kind of mind skill to navigate two worlds. And that is an edge that somebody who doesn't have that experience just simply doesn't have because they've never been exposed to it. I realized, I'm like, wow, so wait, you're telling me that all that stuff actually came into play? Like that worked? I thought it was because I wrote a great essay, and I thought I had good grades, I studied a lot and everything. And they said, well, that helps. But now I'm, in many ways, I'm in charge of doing some of that work, evaluating essays and people who are coming into our program and that kind of thing. And she's like, but think about it. You get 100 essays from 100 students. All of them are straight A students. They wouldn't be in graduate school if they weren't already. These are the top 10% of all the students in the country in forensic psychology. They're all going to have great essays. They're all going to have perfect scores. They're all going to have everything. What is going to be the difference? How do you select one from the other? Really, what you go on is then when you interview them, the way their mind works, the way they approach the world, the way they see people, that's how you decide who's going to be where. And that's what gives you the edge. I didn't realize it until then. Nowadays, what I do, I work here at the prison. I work with men from all walks of life who are now incarcerated. I've also worked in high security facilities here in Victorville, maximum custody security facilities with people who are high-level gang members, cartel, very dangerous individuals. I went to training to become a federal officer. If you go to a month-long federal law enforcement training, because you have to do that. No matter if you're a nurse, public health services, we have dentists, we have physicians. A prison is a self-contained environment. They can't go anywhere. So everything that has to happen for a human being has to happen with them inside these walls. So we have to have chaplains, we have to have dentists, we have to have social workers, we have to have food service administrators, because everything that a human being needs has to be given to them inside. So all of us go, and I'll go to, I went to Glencoe, Georgia for my training. It was myself, it was a paramedic, and it was a pharmacist. All three of us went to federal officer training, and we're running and shooting the guns and everything. And we're sitting there going like, did you ever think you were going to do this? Like, I have no idea. To me, it was kind of fun. I was like, this is really cool. To the pharmacist, Miss Nguyen, she still works there. She's from Public Health Services. And she's like, this is a little awkward. And for her to shoot the shotgun, she's like 90 pounds. was a little different. But here's the thing. What you do is you build camaraderie. You build a sense of kind of like community among staff members. When you're working inside of an environment like that, you need that. You need to know that it doesn't matter if it's a nurse or if it's a chaplain, this person exactly knows what to do in case things come up. One of the biggest challenges right now in working in the arena that I work in is I have to wear those dual hats. I have to be a psychologist most of the time. The 10% of the time when there's a disturbance, when there's a fight, when there's a possible riot, when we find drugs, those are the times that I have to switch and become an officer. And you have to work in both of those arenas. Also, working with officers have a lot of trouble with things like PTSD. Because of the things we see and because of the environments we work in, it's a very dangerous place. So I also have to help the officers. And there's been many times, unfortunately, it's only been 6-7 years now, where I've had to do things like death notifications to family when we've lost an officer inside of our prison. And one of the requirements is that the executive, the warden, he or she, as well as a chaplain and a psychologist, will go visit the home and give the family that news. That's one of the most difficult aspects of my job today, which I never want to do again, hopefully. Knock on whatever this is. Hopefully I'll never have to do that again. But to know that you're going to walk into that door to tell someone that their husband, their father is not coming home, it's one of those things where it really pulls everything in you to get the job done, and then afterwards you go home and you do what you need to do to self-care. One of the big things I teach all my students is self-care. I was glad to hear that today. You need to, whatever field you're in, if you're working with human beings, if you're in human service, in any capacity, you need to first understand that you're a human first. It's kind of like the masks on the airplane. When, they tell you, in the case of an emergency, a mask will drop. What do they tell you to do with children? They tell you put the mask on first and then put it onto the child. Why? Because if you don't do it to yourself, you can't help anybody else. As a human service worker in any field, whether it's nursing or social work or psychology, whatever you choose to do, when you're working with people who are in pain or in distress, it'll take something out of you. And if you don't learn to first understand who you are, that you're frail, that you have emotions, that you will take some of that work home, eventually you will hit a wall. You will not be able to do it. For example, when I did my death notification, the 2 times I've done it, the one time I did it for an officer who was a female, who we lost, and then an officer who was a male. So I had to tell a husband that his wife had passed away, and then I had to tell a wife that her husband had passed away. Both of those times, I distinctly remember, kind of trying to numb myself to get the job done, to be effective, to be there for that person. And then I remember leaving my job and driving home and just not being able to feel almost. And as most of you know, all you want to do is go home to your loved ones. That's all you want to do. And that's all I did. But both of the times afterwards, I took the day off afterwards. Didn't want to go in. I wasn't going to be effective for anybody. And I did what I needed to do to process that, to feel that, to kind of move on from that. While it feels good to be useful, it feels good, to do that, at the same time, it takes its toll on you. So if I was going to be something for the rest of my life, that's the last thing I would choose. Like if right now someone said you can still be a psychologist, but you have to be a psychologist who goes and gives death notifications, then I'd probably go get my Class A license and become a truck driver, and I wouldn't do this anymore. It's too much. It's too much work. It's also the reason why I don't work with sexually abused children anymore. 8 years ago, I became a father. And at that point, I made a decision on my part to move away from the child abuse field and move into working with adults. Why? Because after many years of working with children, I realized one, it takes a lot out of you. But number two, it was going to be hard for me to be objective and still listen to children's stories if those children now were becoming personalized in, something I saw at home. I.e., if I saw a 5-year-old little girl in treatment describe some of the things that children describe and then had to go home to my daughter being 5, it would be too difficult. It would feel too bad. And we're not forced to see someone like that. We don't have to. You can work in any realm of field. I made that decision to move away from children's treatment. There's plenty of people doing excellent work. So I referred my patients to other people, or I wouldn't take on new patients. I'm a little slow. And I started to work with adults, started to work with men, and did all that stuff. One of the beauties of my field right now, and I think I can conclude with this, one of the beauties of my field right now is it's so diverse. The human service field, the psychology field in particular, is so diverse. I can work with children, I can work with adults, I can work with couples, I can teach, I can do research. If I get tired of one thing, it's good to go and move into a different area. That's why right now I do a little bit of clinical work and I do more teaching. Pretty soon I'll be getting into some writing and some research that I want to do. It's just never ending. It's also something that as you grow, as you get aged into, it's kind of better for you. You learn more, you mature more. A lot of fields, it's different. As you get older, you kind of slow down. And some fields, like for example, if I wanted to be a police officer, after a certain age, it slows you down and you can't do the same things anymore. For me, as a psychologist, the more I age, and it's aging coming quick, the more I can still stay on top of my game. And that's one of the things I like about it. There's a lot of opportunity out there. I really encourage you to not necessarily follow the title, but follow what emotionally is telling you, this is what I want to do, this is how I contribute, this is how I help. That's what I think is more important. Later on, I think you'll discover your titles. But for now, I think it's just like, you know what, I want to do that. That's called this. I don't care what it's called, but that's what I want to do. Later on, it'll be a title. I guarantee you. Any questions? Yes.
If I wanted to go into like the juvenile detention centers, would I have to do the same training the correctional officer? Like, is that the same as like prisons?
No, there's two sets of them. The reason in the federal system you have to be a federal officer is because we become correctional officers or federal officers, and then we do our job. So in the state system, you don't have to do it. In the state system, you are contracted as a nurse, a teacher, a psychologist, whatever you are. You only go in there to do your job. If something happens, if there's an emergency, officers in there who are hired as officers will take care of that. You don't. In our system, it's different. In our system, in all the federal system, if anything happens, we are the officers. It's done specifically for legal reasons. If an inmate attacks me, he's attacking a federal officer. It's technically considered assault on a federal officer, which means a significant amount more consequences. If in the state system he attacks me, I'm just a contractor. It's a crime and it's an assault, but he's not attacking an officer. The federal system designed it that way from very, very early on to say if you want to work inside our prisons, you will all become officers. That's a deterrent for inmates to assault anyone. Because it's like, if I put my hands on you, I could get 3 more years in here because I'm technically now assaulting an officer. So if I'm in there, like for example, we get guys for tax fraud. I mean, it's bad, but they didn't kill 20 people, it's tax fraud, so they're there for 2 years. Now, if they're there for 2 years and they get upset and they put their hands on one of the nurses, now they're not in there for tax fraud. Now they're in there for assaulting a federal officer. They can get 5 years on top of that. And that is a crime that is much different than tax evasion or writing bad checks. That's why they do that. In the state systems, in the county systems, they don't do that. You can work in there and you don't have to be an officer. You're just working as a counselor, psychologist, whatever you're working in. Any other questions? Yes.
Will you I just want to know more about your work with the Latino masculinity and the domestic violence, together, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, what is something, if you could just say something that you have learned when you were studying this or you worked with it? Like what is one aspect of this Latino masculinity and domestic violence? Like,
Well, one of the things that I learned, I guess the most interesting thing to me was that, number one, Latino masculinity or machismo has never really been studied with Latino men. Machismo actually is a term that's kind of put on Latino men, but it's actually only been researched and studied with Caucasian men. What we know about masculinity or aggression or how masculinity affects domestic violence mainly comes from what Caucasian males have done to their partners, but it's never applied to Caucasian males. Machistas are Latino men, but in fact, when you've researched it, you've only researched it on Caucasian men, but no one ever applies that to Caucasian men. One of my things that I did was a qualitative research study on men who had perpetrated domestic violence against their female partners who were Latino. And what I found is that Latino men themselves describe machismo as something positive and negative. They don't describe, they say machismo is not all bad. Actually, machismo is good, but you can choose to use it in a bad way, or you can choose to use it in a good way. And I said, give me an example of a bad one. Like, well, like I'm in here for slapping my wife, and I got arrested, and all that happened. He's like, that's a bad way of machismo. Why did you do that? Because I was intoxicated, because I didn't think about what I was doing, for a variety of reasons. I'm like, so give me an example of positive machismo. What does that mean? Positive machismo means, despite the fact that you're a little tired, despite the fact that you got humiliated at work yesterday, despite the fact that you're insecure about your job, you wake up at 6 in the morning and you go and you do your job. Why? Because your family's depending on you. That is positive machismo. That is, as we say in my culture or my family, eso es lo que quiere decir ponerte tus pantalones. That's what it means. Put on your big boy pants and do your job. Why? Because it doesn't matter if you feel scared, if you feel tired, if you feel this. You have a responsibility to provide for your family. And that's what these men would describe as positive machismo. So what we're finding in research now is that actually machismo is a dual concept. Like anything else, like any kind of like gender identity, it's a spectrum. One concept doesn't just mean like he's a machista, he's a horrible, ugly man who beats on women and cheats on his wife and beats his kids. Machismo is just an aspect of masculinity. How you choose to express it is on a continuum. Just like anything else, like for example, think of gender identity or sexual identity. Now we're starting to see in research, it isn't just you're either gay or straight. There's a spectrum. And in a lifetime, people can move across that spectrum. Same thing with masculinity with Latinos. A lot of the guys would describe, when you're younger, cuando eres joven, eres más machista. When you're younger, you are more masculine or like stereotypically bad, or you display more impulsivity, or you don't think of others. As you get older, you become wiser. You don't stop being a macho. You continue to be macho all your life. You're just using your macho in a different way now. Like maybe, let's say, caring for a grandchild. Or let's say trying to teach your children something positive. Those kinds of things. So what I learned, one of the most interesting things was that even Latino men describe machismo in a good and bad way. Unfortunately, that was never been in the research because guess what? No one has ever asked Latino men what they think about machismo. And I thought it was fascinating. I'm like, wait, this is our label. This is the thing that we're all supposed to be. And they're like, yeah, well, no one's ever asked. I'm like, that's a shame. But it's the same thing with other communities. Same thing for African American men, for Asian men, for Pacific Islander, Native Americans. Same thing. No one has ever really researched those communities. If you're interested in research, I highly recommend you do that because I guarantee you, if you want to research an aspect of maybe a cultural piece that you feel is important, I guarantee you there's very little work being done in that area. So you'd probably be the first to do it.
Quick plug. This past week and last week, Sally Casanova Scholars did a presentation, and McNair Scholars did a presentation. If you didn't attend those, and now you're like thinking, oh, maybe I can do some research information is on Titanium. Rosie Guillen is available for any questions. This is an example of what it means to be a researcher, because a lot, like, I don't know if it's 90% or something like that, of the research that's out there is based on Western, what is it? Weird is the acronym, but Western industrialized straight, like, white males, generally. So to kind of flip it and really make progress in our field, we do need researchers who understand the community. So, go ahead.
Other questions? Maybe you, because
Okay.
you already asked.
Yeah, I have a question. So, you know how you say you struggled with writing? So, does it get better going into your PhD or master's? Or is there like support in those kind of programs?
I found a lot of support. What's great about, I guess maybe this time, this era, is that a lot of universities are applying for or trying to augment diversity because there's, and hopefully this will continue. There's a lot of federal mandates and a lot of federal grants out there. So universities are, economically, they're trying to grab a lot of that money. Well, a lot of that money is to research, things in diverse areas. I applied for Pepperdine for their doctoral program. I got in, but then I realized I can't afford it. It's a lot of money. And then they said, apply for a grant. We have a scholarship for diversity in our student population. We need to augment that, so apply to the scholarship. I applied and I got the scholarship. So it was that aspect of it that helped me because universities, especially graduate programs, are really interested in augmenting their diversity. Is it hard? Yes. I won't say it wasn't hard. The support that I got from the faculty was amazing. The support that I got from the university was also really great. But at the same time, you also need to realize that as a human being, as a person, you also need to have family and social support. Community or people who are close to you who also understand that this is a difficult challenge, that this is something that takes a lot of sacrifice. And that's, for some of us, we have more, some of us, we have less. That is something that I think if you're thinking of going into graduate work, especially into doctoral work, you really, really kind of look at those areas of your life and really, be open and discussing that with your loved ones or your significant others, because it is going to take a lot out of them as much as it takes out of you in terms of the time, the energy, the focus. At the time, I had just gotten married, and this is probably not what I would recommend. I had just gotten married, and I just had my first child, and I was halfway through my doctoral training. Not the best idea. It was a lot of work. Because at the same time I was trying to finish all this, I was also struggling with how do I provide, how do I financially, like I needed to do a lot of stuff. And there were many times where like 3 years into it, I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to read anymore. I don't want to write anymore. I'm too tired. It's too stressful. We need more money, all this stuff. I mean, the reality of the world. It was my wife who said, you're not quitting. I don't care what we have to do, but you're more than halfway done, and I realized at that point it's kind of like it's bringing her along into this as well. I mean, she has to pick up the pieces. She has to, help out as much as she can. She has to work, or we have to do whatever we have to do. If I was single, maybe it'd be a little different story, but if you are taking on responsibilities at the same time as you're trying to do graduate training, it's not that it's not impossible. It's totally possible. About half the people I knew in my graduate work, both my master's and my doctoral, we all struggled with the same thing. But I think one of the things that's important is to really bring those people into your network, meaning be open and transparent about, look, I'm going to do this, and it's probably going to be very difficult, and there may be times maybe when I want to quit, or there may be times when I think it's too much, or there may be times when I'm not as available as you'd like me to be. It isn't because I don't care, it isn't because I don't want to, it's because I'm really doing this as a way for me to sacrifice to get something better long term. Afterwards, once you're done with it, it's amazing, and it's interesting to see the benefits of it exponentially, meaning like the opportunities, the doors that it opens. I never even imagined what those would be, but it's nice to see those. Granted, it took a lot of sacrifice and a lot of work, but it is something that I think is very, very doable. The universities, also, if you're unsure, ask. If you're thinking about a program, wherever it may be, I always tell students, don't be afraid to call. Literally, just call the office or the admissions office. Call and say, hey, this is who I am and this is where I am right now. I'm an undergrad or I'm doing this and doing that. I'm interested in your program. Tell me what it's a little bit. Or can you connect me with someone who's in it right now? Or someone that you'd be surprised at how many people are like, sure, like, look, talk to this person. Or we have a person specifically for that. They'll put you in contact with them. I still get calls from Pepperdine University for students who are interested in forensics and working with the government. Students will call me because they've called the school and they said, you know, we've had an alumni of us who's now working in the federal prison system. It sounds like he's doing exactly what you're thinking about doing. If you want me to, I'll put you right in contact with him. They literally give them my office number, and I get calls from students, and I meet with them, and I set up a time, say, let's go for coffee. Or I bring them down and I take them on a tour. And then next thing you know, guess what? They're on the applications roster. They're applying already. They're into their internship. Out of those calls, 4 psychologists that I've met with personally when they were starting their graduate training are now working for the federal prison system. And it was only that call that they made to the admissions office and said, hey, I'm interested in that program. Do you prepare people for forensic work? It's like, hey, guess what? One of our students just got hired. Let me give you his number. And it's just as simple as that. It isn't that they didn't do any work. It isn't that they're like, oh, great, I know you, cool, I'm going to give you a job. No. They, worked their butt off and got straight A's and did everything they had to do. But it was a matter of making that connection. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to get yourself out there. And really just ask. You'd be surprised at how much people are willing to give you in terms of information if you just ask. You have a question too?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, like, what is it about the prison that you love so much?
What is it? Unfortunately, half the population looks like me, which is a sad reflection of our society, but that is the truth. When I first got in there, inmates thought I was like a unit manager, another officer. They were like, what the hell are you? And I'm like, I'm the new psychologist. And they're like, you? I'm like, yeah. I've got a degree and everything, I swear. And they're just like, we've just never seen a Latino psychologist. And I was like, that's sad, because half of you look exactly like me. The other half, guess what they were? African American. So it's kind of like, wow. The psychology staff that I went to work with, all Caucasian females. I was the only male and the only Latino once again. What I like about working in there is that it's the most disenfranchised population aside from children that I've worked with. Meaning it's the population that is literally kind of what is seen as the throwaways of society. The people who have committed crimes. I mean, how many of you, if you had a business, would hire a convicted felon? If someone checked, yes, I've been to federal prison, how many of you would say, yeah, come on in, work with me? How many of you would hire even for, to do your plumbing? How many of you hire them for babysitting? Nobody wants these people around. However, in communities of color, they are the vast majority of specifically the male population, something like 60 to 70%. So what I like about it is, number one, it's exciting. It's kind of a little bit of a non-traditional, kind of sitting in a private office and seeing people day in and day out. I get to do a diverse amount of things. But number two, if I really try and connect with one of these inmates, if I really try and do some work, a lot of times this is the first time these men, number one, have been sober in their lives. A lot of them, 75% of them struggle with substance abuse issues. So for a lot of these men, this is the first time in their life they've ever had a period of sobriety longer than maybe 3 or 4 months. Excuse me. Number two, about 80% of them have some kind of trauma history. Sexual abuse in childhood, exposure to domestic violence. It's not uncommon for me to take a history or start working with somebody and found out they were sexually abused from the time they were 3 or 4 years old. They were beaten up by their parents or caregivers. They were shot by 13 or 14 years old. I mean, they've been through a lot of stuff. But if I can work with them, if I can get them to a place where actually maybe they want to invest something back into their community, 90% of the people that I work with will be out in the community within the next 3 to 5 years. These aren't people, we think they're locked up, okay, they're gone. You don't realize that's a revolving door. They're not there forever. Some of them will be, and some of them need to be. That's where they need to stay. But for most of them, 90% of them are going to be our neighbors. And we get guys coming in and out all the time. So I figured if I can help them, then maybe I'm helping myself a little bit. Right? Almost everyone I work with has children. If I can help him deal with his violence, his substance abuse, his trauma, then hopefully he'll be a little bit better father when he goes out. And so I'm helping his kids too. It feels good to be like, you know what, at least I'm doing my part. Do I get through? Maybe, maybe not. It just depends. But at least I feel like, you know what, in many ways, it's the same thing I felt when I was working with kids. It's kind of like, you know, somebody's got to do this. And it's useful. That is always what I wanted to be. Remember my story with my teacher? I wanted to be someone who did exactly what she did for me. She helped this kid who a lot of people had thought was a throwaway kid, who didn't even believe in himself, and just talk to him. She didn't give me money. She didn't, you know, say, you know, I'll give you a job. She didn't do anything except ask me questions about myself. But think about how far that conversation went. To this day, I still remember that specific question. So I'm like, you know what? I want to do the same thing. That's why I said, forget what the title is called. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a forensic psychologist when I went into City College. I just said I want to be one of those talking people. It's what I wanted to do, and I'm still doing it today. That's what makes it, I think, for me, I enjoy it.
We have time for one more question.
One more.
Do you know of, besides in the prison, of people who have to take those classes for batterers,
Mhm.
do you know of other ones out there for people who are probably struggling with domestic violence, but they're helping the batterers, not the victims necessarily?
Oh yeah, there's a whole network of, if you go to if you get convicted of it, any court in California, you have to take those classes. So every community has a network of providers, clinics or individual providers, people who run those classes. They're called DVIA, Domestic Violence Intervention and Prevention Programs. 52-week mandated course. And unfortunately, it's part of their restitution. So like, for example, guys are convicted of that, and then it's like a DUI thing. You have to take this course. You have to pay the provider however much they charge. Like we charge like $20 a week. So every guy has to come in, pay his $20, sit through the class for 2 hours every week. You can see how happy they're going to be at first, right? When they're there, they're like, oh God, we have to be in here, right? But that's why it's a year long. 6 months into it, they start to listen. 9 months into it, they're like, you know what you're saying is starting to make a lot of sense. And by that time, new people are starting and they're telling the new guys, I know for the first 4 or 5 months, you guys are thinking this is like, you know, going to traffic school. It's actually not. Like, it actually helps. Like, I've learned a lot about myself. I'm becoming a better husband, better father, whatever. Those are all over. In every county, most mental health clinics will have a division of that. Most, like Orange County Mental Health has a lot of clinics that run those classes. All you have to do is go to certification on 40 hours of domestic violence treatment, go to facilitator training, and you can actually become a facilitator for those classes. I do believe you need a degree in psychology or human services or counseling, but I don't think you might even need a master's degree. I think you can do it with a bachelor's.
Thank you very much. Can we give them a round of applause? We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to come out here and really share your story. Such a powerful story with, I think, basically all of the points that we're trying to hit here in the Allied Health Academy, you know, like really emphasizing that coming from the communities that we come from, there's really that's really an asset, right? The ability to think in a different way than how the rest of mainstream society is looking, and the different stories that you've had. Like I think it was really helpful for our students to see an example of what a success story is. So with that, thank you very much.
Huge.
Just a little bit, very helpful. But what we usually do is take a group photo. So if we can have everyone. Yeah. I'd love to have you back again.
Yes, that's fine. Oh, did you?
Yeah, so that's like
Yeah.
2 hours already.